Right, today, everybody, I'm going to be talking to you about Lady Macbeth. I raised this question, is she evil or is she just plain bonkers? I think most people's reaction to Lady Macbeth is that she is the fiendish queen that Malcolm calls her at the end of the play. Indeed, it would be easy to agree. Her first appearance in the play has her musing over her husband being too full of the milk of human kindness. Later, when she discovers that Duncan will dine with them, she tells Macbeth that the king never shall that morrow see. She questions Macbeth's manliness when he wavers. She washes the daggers of Duncan's blood. She makes excuses for Macbeth at the banquet in which Banquo appears. But is this the whole story? Is she, as she is often depicted in productions, a sort of earthly minister of the weird sister's evil plan? Now, I've seen a production of Macbeth at the Globe Theatre in London, in which she is portrayed as a feisty, flirty woman dancing provocatively with Duncan on the night of his murder. She's the darling of Scottish society, not the creepy, unhinged woman with too bright lipstick that so many directors are in a hurry to depict her as. Alternatively, Patrick Stewart, when discussing Rupert Gould's 2007 version of the play, which went from Chichester to Broadway, imagines her as at least a generation younger than her husband, far more hungry for power and fame than he is. He's already got his power and reputation, gained through his prowess on the battlefield. But she wants more. This makes sense. We have to remember, and this is where you can make an AO3 comment on context, that it was quite common, if not normal, for men to be much older than their wives in Shakespeare's time. It was unlikely to be any different in the 11th century Scotland when the play is set. Remember that Juliet's father is much, much older than her mother, and Baz Luhrmann gets this right in his celluloid version of the story of the two star-crossed lovers. Marriage was not about love, it was a business transaction, and the only way for an 11th or indeed 17th century woman to gain power was through her husband. However, I do think they are in love with each other, and remain so after the death of Duncan. They share lines, pick up on each other's imagery, as if they know how each other's mind works. Even when they're having a row in Act 1, Scene 7, he hath honoured me of late, and I have bought golden opinions from all sorts of people, which would be worn now in their newest gloss, not cast aside so soon. Lady Macbeth replies to this, was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself? Hath it slept since, and wakes it now to look so green and pale at what it did so freely? Lady Macbeth picks up on Macbeth's clothing imagery and runs with it, likening Macbeth's decision like someone who gets dressed when drunk, then regrets what he is now wearing. After she berates him for changing his mind, Macbeth still adores his wife. Bring forth men children only. He doesn't want her to know what will happen to Banquo. Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck. But perhaps he knows that she has a brittle spirit, ready to break at any moment. So, is Lady Macbeth an agent of the witches? I think many would like to think so. The evil queen in waiting, the bad woman who leads her husband astray. And this ties in with Jacobean attitudes to gender. Men equals good, woman equals bad. This regard of women as being the agents of evil stems from the religious ideas at the time. It was Eve, after all, that led Adam astray and took the forbidden fruit. It is she who is responsible for casting man out of the Garden of Eden. One of Gustave Doré's engravings that accompanies Milton's Paradise Lost shows the angel Raphael explaining to the first couple the difference between heavenly and earthly food. Adam looks attentive. Eve looks bored, as if her mind is on something else. Power, perhaps. This scene occurs after Eve has dreamt that the devil has spoken to her. I mention this because the two texts are often compared, something those of you interested in English literature at A-level or degree level will discover. Both Eve and Lady Macbeth become catalysts to their partner's actions, and then try to justify their actions by hatching plans to make the eating of the fruit and murder of the king look accidental. This representation of ambitious women is with us today, unfortunately. Look at some of the media's treatment of Meghan Markle. Claire Cohen in the Daily Telegraph recognises this berating the tired tropes about women. She says, "So why do so many insist on blaming the woman and devoid the easily led husband of responsibility? Burn the witch. It's a cliche older than Lady Macbeth." And so back to that list of tropes. The hysterical woman, the gold digger, the ruthless career woman, the feminist, the bridezilla, the nagging wife. Back to Lady Macbeth then. While I don't dispute that she has murder on her mind, though she can't bring herself to do the deed, claiming that Duncan looks too much like her father. Had he not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it. She clearly, though, can't cope with what the couple conspired to do. But she also believes that you need to be a man to be violent. She demands the spirits to unsex her, to make her less feminine. So is she claiming that women can't be like men? That only men are capable of direst cruelty? At the same time, we have to remember the backstory, or at least we have to imagine one. In the Justin Kurzel 2015 movie Macbeth shows the Macbeth's baby's funeral service. We know that the couple have had a son. I have given suck. And Lady Macbeth uses this memory to show how hurt she is by Macbeth's broken promise. But we don't know when it happened. Could the child have died very recently? Could Macbeth have been away at war, leaving Lady Macbeth to grieve on her own? Perhaps she's suffering from depression. At the West Sussex Records Office, just down at the end of West Street in Chichester, are the patient records of Graylingwell Hospital when it was an asylum in the late 19th century. There are records of female inmates who suffered from mania brought on by love or puerperal or childbed fever. Victims of this often fatal disease contracted after childbirth would show signs of mania, depression and madness. Today, it is sometimes referred to as postpartum psychosis. If we imagine that Lady Macbeth is either suffering from postpartum psychosis or perhaps mourning the death of her child, would she be acting so rationally? And when, in a moment of clarity, she discovers what she and her husband have done, it is all too much for her. Her husband is again too busy. He asks the doctor to cure her of her thick-coming fancies. When he is told of her death, he spends a moment on her demise before launching into one of the most memorable soliloquies in the English language. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day, in which he muses on the futility of life. But how can we use this in an exam? The examiner will want you to be convincing, showing critical analysis and exploration to get the higher band marks. So you could write a paragraph like this. It could be all too easy to dismiss Lady Macbeth as a fiendish queen. She certainly is as ambitious as Macbeth, if not more so. And she convinces him to go ahead with the murder when he begins to waver. We shall proceed no further with this business. However, it could be argued that whereas Macbeth has no remorse once he is king, Lady Macbeth's guilt consumes her till she takes her own life. I would go even further, suggesting that when Macbeth has his doubts in his soliloquy, he's merely playing devil's advocate to express his own doubts. His mind has been made up already once the weird sisters tell him of the possibility of kingship. He merely wants to convince himself by presenting himself as doubtful to his wife. While he embarks on a bloody journey of murder and chaos, Lady Macbeth descends into a lost, childless, manic character who dies alone. Remember, the examiner wants you to show that you can think. There are no clear answers, and you could argue that Lady Macbeth is indeed evil. But as long as you realise that she, like most Shakespearean characters, especially in Macbeth, and of course in real life, is very complex, then you ought to do well.